Carly,
I'm Aliana.
and our presentation is on the 2006 Slagle lecture titled The World of Everyday Occupation, Real People, Real Lives.
Before we begin, we want to introduce the speaker of our lecture, Dr. Betty Racine Hasselkuss. She has more than 40 years of active participation in occupational therapy. Her focus is emphasized on family caregiving, the meaning of doing occupational therapy, and the meanings of everyday life. In 1986, she was elected to be part of AOTA's roster of fellows, received AOTF's Academy of Research in 1999, and was the editor-in-chief of AJOT from 1998 to 2003. In 2005, she received the AOTA Eleanor Clark Slagle Lectureship Award and presented the award lecture in 2006, which is what we will be discussing and breaking down for you all throughout this presentation. Next, we're going to be talking about our outline. So here is the overview of our Slagle lecture presentation. It starts off with why everyday occupations are important, why everyday occupations are often seen but unnoticed, how we can see and notice everyday occupations, the discussion board question, and finally, the take-home message.
So, why are everyday occupations important? According to Dr. Hasselkuss, everyday occupations are a primary means by which we organize our lives. So, for example, an everyday occupation that we all do is get dressed. Now, maybe there's some people during quarantine that just wear PJs all day. I do that a lot more than I'd like to admit. But when we do get dressed, what does that actually signify? Well, it signifies that you are preparing for the day and usually getting ready to go somewhere or do something. So just by getting dressed, I'm already organizing my life in one way. Another reason why everyday occupations are important is because they're like an anchor in our lives. What do they anchor though, you might ask? Well, our everyday life anchors what we know to be normal. To understand this, all you need to do is think about COVID-19. What is the current question that is always thrown around these days? Is this the new normal? That question is being asked because our everyday lives and occupations have been totally disrupted by COVID-19, and therefore our sense of what is normal is being challenged. The last reason everyday occupations are important is because they actually give a lot of meaning to our lives. This is because whenever we perform an everyday occupation, there's a lot of what Dr. Hasselkuss describes as small behaviors and experiences surrounding that everyday occupation.
Everyday occupations seen but unnoticed. Although everyday occupations are important for the reasons explained by Carly in the previous slide, Dr. Hasselkuss's main argument in this lecture is that everyday occupations are often seen but unnoticed. At first, we were very confused when we first read this. How can an occupation be seen but not noticed? Well, we learned that Dr. Hasselkuss basically means when she says this is that we are aware that everyday occupations exist in our lives, but we do not always notice the beauty, the complexity, and the delicate layerings of everyday occupations that are essential to our quality of life and the world of occupational therapy. She gives 3 reasons why people often fail to really notice the value of everyday occupations. Now, we are going to expand more on each of these 3 reasons on the following slides.
So let's start with reason number 1. So Dr. Hasselkuss points out that one reason everyday occupation is often seen but unnoticed is the matter of social power. She says, words have a lot of power, or not. So let's put this point to the test. When you think of your everyday life, especially right now during quarantine, do any of the following words come to mind? Routine, ordinary, typical, basic. I'm sure we all have described our everyday life using at least one of these words, and these words probably resonate more now during quarantine. Let me ask you though, when you hear the words routine, ordinary, typical, basic, do these words invoke feelings of excitement in you? I'm going to go with probably not. These are words that Dr. Hasselkuss describes as humdrum, boring, and unexciting, and therefore essentially powerless. So the very fact that the words we ascribe to our everyday lives do not hold any power or invoke excitement in us is just one reason why people do not really give much notice to everyday occupations, according to Dr. Hasselkuss.
Reason number 2. Dr. Hasselkuss also says everyday occupations are seen as commonalities across people, countries, and even cultures, something we all do. And commonality leads to the lack of distinction, the loss of individuality and personality. If you think about it, there are a lot of everyday occupations that we can see we all have in common. We all brush our teeth, bathe, shower, go to the bathroom, eat, get dressed, engage in social and leisure activities, and sleep. In other words, the 9 areas of occupation, or air swells. They're what we see we have in common. But what we might fail to notice are all the underlying client factors, the performance skills, the performance patterns, and the context and environment that go into performing that common occupation. Let's illustrate this by taking the everyday occupation of sleep, which we all do. We all sleep, but we prepare to go to bed probably differs from each other. So for example, Carly, how do you get ready for bed?
Well, I start to wind down around 9 p.m. Then I read a book for about 15 to 30 minutes. Then I pray, and then I watch Netflix until I fall asleep. But let me ask you, Aliana, how do you get ready for bed?
Well, Carly, I get to bed a lot differently from you. I get ready for bed around 11 p.m. I brush my teeth, floss, put my retainer on, take off my contacts, and then I watch and laugh at YouTube for hours until I fall asleep. So, class, as you can see through our examples and through those GIFs, although we both engage in a common occupation such as getting ready for bed, how we do it is distinct to each of us. And in a way, it gives insight to our individuality.
Now we'll talk about the last reason, reason number 3. So because everyday occupations are often seen as routine and unexciting, as I mentioned previously, people often fail to notice how much meaning they actually hold. A lot of people take everyday occupations for granted until they're no longer able to do them. For example, if we work with a client who has a spinal cord injury, what was basically familiar and routine to them has now become unfamiliar and challenging.
We now invite you to reflect on this question. What are some everyday occupations you see you took for granted before COVID-19, but now notice how much meaning they bring to your life?
And Aliana and I actually made a list, and these include spending time with friends and family, going out to eat, grocery shopping in peace, the good old days, and going to the gym. So how can we make sure to see and notice everyday occupations? So in order to see and notice everyday occupations, we have to look at them from 2 levels. 1 is the individual level, and 2 is the community/group level. So at the individual level, we have to notice the small behaviors and experiences surrounding that individual's everyday occupations. At the community/group level, we have to understand that there's societal forces such as occupational deprivation that impact participation in everyday occupations. So we're going to start by explaining how we can see and notice everyday occupations at the individual level.
So like Carly said, let's start with discussing everyday occupations at the individual level. Dr. Hasselkuss describes different stories of small experiences and how noticing these small experiences can make an impact on one's life. She gives multiple examples, so we're only going to focus on a few of them. In the next few slides, we will be talking about the small experiences as it relates to everyday occupation related to food, clothes, and where we put things. Here's one of the stories that Dr. Hasselkuss heard from a caregiver who was caring for her father with dementia. Last year for Thanksgiving, my father hadn't been eating, and we went to pick him up at the nursing home and brought him to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. My father had always loved prime ribs, so I had fixed prime ribs for Thanksgiving dinner. I had turkey and everything, but I also had prime rib. When I fixed my father's plate, I said, "Dad, this is prime rib," and I put a piece in his mouth. My father tasted it, and for some reason, he just started grabbing, reaching for the plate. I could not get it in him fast enough. He started chewing, and he hadn't chewed in almost a month. It was the most uplifting. It was just a miracle. That's about all I can say. And that made Thanksgiving beautiful. Many people with cognitive impairments, such as dementia, lose both the pleasure previously found in eating and the ability to carry out the eating process. The daughter in the story took something small and meaningful in an everyday occupation to restore her father's occupation of eating to one that offered both the consumption of food and pleasure. This story really resonated with me and Carly because it reminds us of how beautiful OT can be. Something so small can help us find the beauty in everyday occupations that are far from being something so small or simple like the act of getting food into the body.
Ain't that the truth? So, in another story related to everyday occupation and dementia, a daycare staff member explained how one client was agitated during group, especially during mealtime. Like the man in the previous story, he was not eating well either. But one day, it was suggested that he eat alone in the back of an office away from the rest of the group. With this change, the staff actually noticed this client would bless himself and his food and finally even eat his meal. What they did not know about him until then was that this man had a history of being accustomed to eating alone, or at least in a very quiet environment. And he had a routine that he was used to following, which included blessing himself and the food. And this routine was something that was totally lost in the group meal situation of the center. This story, as well as the Thanksgiving story Aliana just told, shows how small experiences, whether it's something simple like just following a familiar routine, can impact one's participation in an everyday occupation.
Next, we're going to talk about something small like clothes and how it is important in our everyday occupation. As we know, dressing oneself with clothes independently is often a therapeutic goal we have in our practice. However, when we try to achieve these goals, we're sometimes forgetting how clothes and fashion could be a form of expression and it's important for our clients. We're not taking into consideration being stylish. We're losing sight of how the small behavior of expressing oneself can impact the everyday occupation of dressing oneself. For example, when we give our clients splints, we're not considering if they feel affected by it or its appearance. In 2006, when this lecture was presented, clothes made for those with disabilities were seen as stylish and androgynous. However, it's been 14 years since this lecture, and clothes for those with disabilities have become more stylish. Some examples of new adaptive clothing include Tommy Hilfiger's Tommy Adaptive, which shows fashionable clothes fit for those with disabilities, Nike's Fly Ease, which offers an easy zipper so that those with any ability or disability can take on and off their shoes, and Target Adaptive, which offers children with disabilities clothes for either every day or for a special occasion like Halloween. These new adaptive yet stylish clothes shows how the small experience of wanting to express oneself can be so important to our clients.
Rest yourself. Well said, Aliana.
Thanks, Carly.
Okay, so now we will discuss how the placement of our belongings can impact our everyday occupations. So Dr. Hasselkuss pointed out that something small we would see as future OTs, but sometimes might not notice, is home modifications. When we recommend modifying an environment, such as removing throw rugs, we have to take into consideration what those items mean to the family. What if the throw rug we suggested to remove was passed down from generation to generation? Although the home modifications we suggest are reasonable to us, it may not fit with our client's own sense of where things belong. We are not noticing that where we put things can draw from strong family history. If we do not notice these small experiences or behaviors as practitioners, we are straying away from delivering that client-centered care that we so often strive to achieve.
Now that we've talked about how we can see and notice everyday occupations at the individual level, we will broaden our understanding of how we can see and notice everyday occupations at the larger community group level.
So on a larger level, one thing we often can see is that occupational deprivation exists, but what we sometimes might not notice is the impact it has on communities and groups. We're going to look at the impact of occupational deprivation through 3 different lenses. Dr. Hasselkuss talks about occupational deprivation through the lens of the prison system, and we are also going to look at occupational deprivation through the lens of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, as these are both very relevant topics impacting everyday occupation for groups of people in the world today.
Let's start off with the prison system. Dr. Hasselkuss talks about a video, "You Don't Want to Live in My House," in which men describe firsthand what it was like to be in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. In prison, it's the same thing day in, day out, 24 hours a day. The men were asked to share what they missed most from their previous lives outside the prison. The emphasis was on missing the everydayness of life, such as making breakfast for their kids, just looking at the sky, going to the store, taking a shower whenever they wanted to, and making a phone call. This shows that the importance of everyday occupations has an impact on the quality of our lives.
So now we're going to shift gears to present day and talk about how COVID-19 has led to occupational deprivation for us right now. So during this pandemic, we have been asked to shelter in place and social distance from each other, which, although is meant to keep us all safe, it's also preventing us from engaging in a lot of everyday occupations we were so used to doing before the pandemic. And even though we're not in literal prisons, we probably have felt imprisoned in our own homes at some point. This TikTok video does a good job representing how bored we have become staying at home all the time, and I suggest you watch it if you want a good laugh. At this point, I actually want you all to reflect though. How do you feel now compared to before this pandemic started 3 months ago? I'm actually going to ask you, Aliana, how do you feel now compared to 3 months ago?
Well, Carly, I have had my fair share of stressful times, and I've had 1 or 2 meltdowns, especially in the beginning of this pandemic.
Only 1 or 2?
Well, yeah, but although I have had those meltdowns, as time goes by, I think I've learned to just appreciate the little things, like the ones you mentioned earlier, and like spending time with my family, going on walks, and just hanging out with my dogs.
That's really great to hear. And I also agree that this time of occupational deprivation is making me appreciate a lot of the everyday occupations I once took for granted too.
That's great, Carly.
Thanks.
So, We wanted to provide you, class, with some quick free resources that you all have access to if you feel alone or if you know someone who might need it, as this pandemic is affecting our everyday occupations. So go ahead and pause this video presentation if it's needed. And we do want to let you know that we miss you guys. Virtual hug. And we just can't wait to be reunited again. If you are feeling alone, just know that we both and everyone in the cohort supports you even if we're miles away from each other. And although we aren't together physically, just remember that we are all in this together.
Very well said, Aliana. So another current topic we wanted to discuss related to occupational deprivation is the Black Lives Matter movement. I think we are all well aware by now that the Black community is not given the same opportunities in life or access to healthcare as their white counterparts due to systemic racism and various implicit biases that exist not only within the healthcare system, but also just in society as a whole. As future OTs, we need to also recognize that Black people often do not feel safe performing some of the everyday occupations that most of us can so easily do without even a second thought. I don't know about you, but I personally have never worried about my safety when I go on a jog. I also have always felt like I can relax in the comfort of my own home. When I've been in a car crash, I'm not scared to ask for help. And I can play loud music without having anything to worry about. Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Jonathan Farrell, Renisha McBride, and Jordan Davis are just a few of many people in the Black community who have been killed doing simple everyday occupations such as these that should have been safe and normal for them. As citizens, but especially as future OTs, we need to be catalysts for social transformation by seeing and noticing the racial disparities and injustices that prevent the Black community from engaging in everyday occupations safely.
Here are some resources that we all have access to right now where we can help. Whether you're advocating silently or vocally, we can sign petitions, donate, educate ourselves and others by reading, watching movies, or documentaries. Black Lives Matter. This shouldn't just be a trend where we fight for the injustice and inclusivity for a few weeks, but it's something we need to fight for constantly as we continue on in our career as future OTs. This is a movement. It's not just a moment. After all, our profession strives for the inclusivity, diversity, and occupational engagement in activities. We need to always advocate for those who experience occupational deprivation, whether they're experiencing it for physical reasons, developmental reasons, social reasons, or racial reasons. Before we conclude our presentation, we do want to tell you the discussion board question. It is, what are some of your everyday occupations? Pick at least one and explain how that occupation reveals a part of who you are.
So we have a few take-home messages for you as we transition from OT students to clinicians. First, remember that everyday occupations are important for organizing our lives, anchoring what we know to be normal, and giving meaning to our lives. Second, remember that everyday occupations are at the center of OT practice, and the value of everyday occupations is something we should always strive to see and notice. In order to notice this at the individual level, we need to pay attention to the small experiences that surround an individual's everyday occupations and adjust our practices to align with those experiences. At the community level, we need to recognize how occupational deprivation can impact participation in everyday occupations for certain groups of people, and we need to be catalysts for social reformation during these challenging and uncertain times in the future. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.